Welcome to another episode of Football Insiders. Jason Andera, Midco Sports. Michael McCleary from Argus Leader Media. And Michael, you made it through your first South Dakota football regular season. We're ready to talk playoffs in the small schools in the last big week of big schools. Any initial assessments before we get into the deeper dive here?
Like every week, I'm excited.
That's why we have you, Michael. That's why we have you. Bring the excitement. Let's bring the excitement. Let's talk a little bit about last week's 11 AAA games. First of all, Harrisburg at Jefferson, or Jefferson, I should say, at Harrisburg. And once again, the MO for Harrisburg is, play with the other team and then pull away in the second half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this was a really, really good game. Maybe one of the games of the year in the first half.
Yeah.
Taylor Ashley led under 2 minutes with under 2 minutes left in the half. He led a drive basically all by himself, 2 runs to the outside, and then hitting Griffin Wilde in the back of the end zone. And it really looked like Jefferson was going to surprise. And then Harrisburg just imposed what they do all the time. They came back with their offense. They were able to shut Jefferson down on the defensive end, which is something that I guess they've been vulnerable to at times. Having some defensive lapses. So. This team's looking more and more powerful every single week. Even with those little scares, it seems like they've come out of that obviously unscathed, but even a little bit better now.
Yeah, you watch the game, and sometimes I'm surprised when I look at the stats after the game, and I'm like, Gavin Ross, 280 yards. I mean, he's just methodically beating you down all game long, and he really piles up those yards. Jacob Knuth with another very efficient week, finding several different receivers. So a nice win for Harrisburg. Roosevelt stays hot. They got not just a win, they exploded in the second quarter against Lincoln.
Yeah, I mean, Roosevelt really, really, really is impressive.
They really have.
Over the past couple of weeks. I mean, this is their third straight win. Back in the beginning of the season, they were just looking for one. It's pretty incredible how much of a turnaround that they've made, and they're really looking like maybe one of the top 4 teams in this class.
I'll tell you, it was about 3 weeks ago. I talked to Kim Nelson, and he said we're just looking for identity. We could win the rest of our games this year. We could lose the rest of our games. I'm not sure which direction we're going, but we're gonna have an identity, and they've found that identity.
Oh, yeah. They could run the ball. They're playing much better on the defensive end. I mean, this is a really, really good team. And Jackson Brower is really coming into, he's not making the huge plays that, some of the quarterbacks at the top of the class. He does, but, he's a really, really good game manager for a sophomore, which is really impressive for somebody who, basically didn't really know he was going to play the position coming in. He came into this year as a wide receiver. He was expecting to play wide receiver after he got cut from his freshman team at quarterback, and then Kim Nelson gave him a text after the Jefferson sort of thing started playing out a little bit, and now he's looking more like a quarterback than ever. So it's really impressive.
Another sophomore quarterback, Lincoln, on the other side, Tate Schaefer. I mean, you look at the numbers. He had 3 interceptions. Don't put those all on him. There was a lot of miscommunication and just plays that Lincoln is better than. And I feel like they're going to sew up some of those mistakes, and we'll talk about them as they have a big game coming up this week. Let's talk about this week's games, and why not start with a late season battle of unbeatens. We don't get this very often, where you come into the last week of the season and the top 2 teams in the biggest class are both undefeated.
Yeah, I don't know what you mean. It's happened every single time that I've been here.
100% chance.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a real, really exciting game. I mean, before I even knew this was on the schedule, this was the matchup I wanted to see. And, I wasn't sure, this could be a preview of the 11 AAA championship, depending on how the bracket plays out. I would imagine
obviously
1 and 2 seed would be separate sides of the bracket. So I mean, this is a really, really good game. I mean, Brandon Valley just almost, just by will of just what they do as a team, they manage to rise and fall with their offensive performance just based on what they need. But they only give up 11.25 points per game on the defensive end, and they're going up against probably the best offense in AAA too. So, I mean, this is one of those classic cliche scenarios of, big offense versus big defense, and it's going to be really, really exciting.
This is big boy football for sure, and I had a chance to catch up with both coaches yesterday, and here's what they had to say about the keys to the game.
If we can stop them on first down and not get them in 2nd and 5s, and then us being able to get 2nd and 5s. That's where this game's going to be won, and then obviously 3rd down conversion, that's every game. But it's going to be who's ready to go on first down, and if you can stay ahead of the chains, your playbook continues to open up. You can break tendencies a little bit more throughout that game, and that's where it's going to be won.
Well, Gavin Ross is special, and he has to receive extra attention. Takeaways are always a big deal, and field position is enormous too with special teams. In the Coach Garrow method, where if we can play the field position game, get stops, even if we don't score, move the ball, and make other teams work for their gains instead of just big chunk plays, big explosive plays, then it's just, every odd is in your favor if you can get a lot of that done.
Well, no surprise. I think these teams know what they're up against. But this Brandon Valley team, one interesting thing is they haven't had to play from behind very much this year, maybe behind a little bit in the Roosevelt game. What happens if they get behind against Harrisburg? I think that would be maybe a new scenario for them if that happens, because Harrisburg's been known to, let the other team play with them.
Yeah, and the great thing about this game is something has to go differently for there to be a result. Harrisburg has won their games by imposing their offense early and just being too strong towards the end of the game for anybody to come back into it. And Brandon has won their game just by sort of controlling the pace from the very first play of the game and, preventing points on the board, getting that first touchdown, and then maybe really not even have to get in for a very long time after that.
Yeah.
So, it's really interesting because even though this is probably going to be a game that, in hindsight you look back and you're like, wow, this was a fight to the very end, the mood of the game and who's taking control is really going to be established from the first couple drives. And I'm really interested to see who comes out to this game, and imposes their will more.
I was interested to ask a lot of the players as I was out at practice, how important is this game? I mean, you have home field throughout. You have a good shot at playing them again. Maybe you don't want to reveal too much, and both of them kind of squashed that. I mean, almost every player squashed that and said, hey, this is the only game that matters, is the one that's coming up this week. We have to practice beating this team if we want to beat them again. And I thought that was really interesting, the importance of this game. It's a big deal for both teams.
Yeah, and that's not looking ahead. That makes total sense. I mean, just purely from a week 7 to week 8 point, that's that's a classic response, So
and they're all competitors. I mean, they want to show the rest of the class what they're made of, and it doesn't hurt that they also have a trophy that they play for in this game, which, by the way, Brandon has won ever since Harrisburg has been in the big class, but they have a little rivalry trophy that they're playing for.
Yeah, and like all the players said, I mean, these teams expect to be in towards the end of the playoffs, so they come into this game expecting that they're going to play each other again, because if they don't play each other again, then something went badly wrong.
Another interesting thing on the line, and none of the players brought this up or coaches, but I got to imagine you want to be the 1 seed if you have an opportunity to play Stevens rather than potentially a Washington or O'Gorman or a Jefferson. I think they see a little gap between Rapid City Stevens and the rest of the class, so they would love to take this number 1 seed just for that reason.
Yeah, and it also might not even be Rapid City Stevens, right?
Central.
Yeah, it might be Central. So we actually have a game this week to decide that. I agree. I mean, whoever's playing for this 1 seed has to know that there's a battle for that 8 seed going on, and that 8 seed's going to be considerably easier to beat than that 7 seed. So, I'm comfortable with both of these teams wherever they end up in the playoffs. They've proven throughout the season that they deserve that level of confidence. But, I would have to imagine that, because it's been said that, the West River teams have been struggling a little bit. So players have acknowledged that, you can't necessarily read too much into those performances.
They could bite you, but they've given up a lot more points.
For sure. So, yeah, this is that's definitely a game that people are paying attention to, even if they're not saying it.
Looking forward to that one. We're going to have that one on Midco. I'm sure you guys have coverage on that one as well. Some more games in 11 AAA. We've got Jefferson taking on O'Gorman, and the winner of this game has a shot at getting a home game. There's a lot of things that still have to play out, but definitely something at stake in this one as well. Yeah, and these are two teams that have kind of slid a little bit towards the end of the year, and O'Gorman's kind of coming into their own. They're winning games, but they've beaten Central and Stevens and Huron, so they would love to get a quality win coming into the.
Yeah, their last couple quality opponents haven't gone totally well for them, but Bennett Dannenberg is playing a lot better right now. Obviously we know about their playmakers. They're a really good team, and Jefferson showed in the first half last week what they could do on offense too. So Jefferson's struggling with injuries a little bit. Their numbers are a bit small, and head coach Vince Benedetto is trying all he can to get as many people into the game. He said that last week, he might have played his players, double the amount of time that the Harrisburg players, because they have to play both sides of the ball where they stand right now. So, that's going to be a little bit of a struggle for them. But if they start to get healthy, they're as explosive a team as any, and this is the final stretch where you get to do it.
Another big battle for seeding coming up between Lincoln and Washington. Lincoln right now has one more victory than Washington, but if Washington wins, they tie Lincoln and they get the tiebreaker. Things could really come down to a lot of head-to-head battles, and everybody's kind of been beaten up on each other this year. This is a classic Sioux Falls battle where Washington feels like they can play with Lincoln. Lincoln, if they can't put a win together this week, all of a sudden, they've lost 3 out of their last 4.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. Washington at Lincoln and O'Gorman at Jefferson, the loser of those two games would probably play each other in the playoffs, right?
It depends. There's a lot of stuff still hanging out there. If O'Gorman loses, they could go all the way down to the 7 seed too, which would mean they would play Brandon Valley. So there's a lot at stake here, and it's, I'm sure the coaches have it all penciled in and figured out, but there's just too many variables at this point to be able to peg that.
Yeah, but it just really shows just how close this class has been all year long. There have been instances where, this team is doing really, really well, and this team maybe isn't doing as well, and then just a few weeks later, that completely flips.
Right.
And, that's what it's been like all week long, and I got to say, that makes you more excited for the playoffs once they come around.
It does. The other game, Roosevelt, is at Aberdeen, and Aberdeen has been struggling in the second half of the season. Roosevelt has been one of the hotter teams. They can't look past Aberdeen, but it's looking good in the position that they're in. Let's move on to 11 AA. Pierre, 3 weeks in a row, have put up 50 or more. Lincoln Caneholz throws 7 touchdowns, and it's not even his best performance of the year.
Yeah, they're good.
He's for real.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we knew that about Lincoln before the season, but Pierre, that first week of the season, it's hanging really heavy right at this point.
Although you look at the seed points right now, and the way it works out, they're tied with T in seed points. Right now, T has the tiebreaker, but T plays West Central this week, a team that's 4-4. So if they were to beat West Central, they'd be 4-5. That's a sub 500 win, and Pierre plays Brookings. If they get a win against Brookings, Brookings would be 6-3, and that's a above 500 win. That gives them percentage points. So Pierre could be the number 1 seed, likely, no matter what happens in the games coming up this week. Let's talk about those games. Brookings starts out with Pierre, and as I said, Pierre could get the top seed out of this.
Yeah, and Brookings has been really, really good.
They have
so
big test.
Yeah, that's not a game that Pierre can look past at all, because if we expect this to be a 3-man race as opposed to just Pierre and T, Brookings is going to be right in there. And how they played towards the end of the year, they didn't start as well as T and Pierre obviously did, but they look as strong as any team in this class at this point. So
they got the toughest schedule in AA because they're one of the only teams at the top that had to play Pierre and T this year. So this is interesting for Brookings. They're not. Pierre's played teams with really good quarterbacks with Sam Rolfs, and then Drew Norberg had a huge game against them. This is going to be a much different style team that Pierre has to play against in Brookings with Justin Kofel, who's an efficient quarterback, but he's not going to burn you downfield. They're going to try to run it with Hunter Gray and Tyson Brandt, and I'll tell you what, it'll be a little different look for this Pierre team who's not as big up front as they have been. It'll be really interesting to see how they measure up.
Yeah.
Let's look at Yankton at Watertown. This one, the winner probably gets a home game in 11 AA, so that's a huge game for both of those teams. Mitchell coming off a win last week. Huron, they need a win to make sure they make the playoffs. They may anyway, but Mitchell toward the bottom and Huron toward the bottom, but still definitely something at stake there. West Central at T. T needs the win to give them a chance to get the number 1 seed, even though they're undefeated. Sturgis plays Douglas. Sturgis has an outside shot to make the playoffs. And Spearfish at Belfouche, and then we already talked about Aberdeen taking on Roosevelt this week. So there's your look at the slate in 11 AA. 11A, we had a little bit of an upset last week. Tri-Valley, who's kind of been around that Mendoza line, around that 500 mark, and they got a nice win against the hottest team, one of the hottest teams in the class, against Vermilion last week. And all of a sudden that puts them in contention for making some noise. What do you make of 11A? We've got Canton up there. Madison's been the cream of the crop. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I was out at the Madison game last week, and they just annihilated West Central. And West Central has been one of those teams that, with Lennox and Del Rapids and also Vermilion,
all those teams.
All those teams that have sort of been kind of rising a little bit towards the end of the year, but for Madison to beat West Central so badly, coming into the game, you think
they took control early. I think the score was only 20, but they took control.
Yeah, and to be honest, they didn't even play, to the best of their ability. They turned over the ball quite a few times. That's something that they said after the game. There's still things they need to clean up, even though they're 8-0. But it makes you wonder for them to beat one of those teams in the class that were just kind of rising up towards the end of the year. Does it kind of lessen the importance of some of those teams that were making their rise towards the end of the year? I think Vermilion's for real, and you got to include Tri-Valley in there too because they just beat Vermilion. But it makes you wonder what those kind of late season risers is that like a legitimate they could be contenders, or is it just they're playing a little bit of softer part of their schedule?
This is the class we've seen upsets in the quarterfinals. I think anybody in this class can play with any of the other teams. This week we've got Dells at Tri-Valley. The winner could be as high as the 3 seed. The loser could be as low as the 7 seed. So this is going to go a long ways to deciding where you are between that 1 and 8 mess in 11A. So they'll take on each other. And then we got the Black and Blue Bowl between Lennox and Canton. Canton, of course, needs to solidify that number 2 spot. They're pretty well locked into that. And Lennox, on the other hand, on the outside looking in, we talked about these teams, Sioux Falls Christian, Millbank, Lennox. They all need wins coming into this week to assure themselves. But depending on how things work out, I did the projections, and it looks like Lennox, if they don't win, they're going to be out of luck in 11A.
Yeah, it's incredible how many of those teams you just mentioned that were at one point, maybe one of the top 3-4 teams in the class. Exactly. So this class has been extremely volatile this year, and that's obviously an exciting look for the playoffs. But you wonder if those teams that have been bouncing around can compete with the Madison and the Canton.
Exactly. 11B and lower, they start the playoffs coming up Thursday night, and just overview some of the interesting games we want to talk about. In 11B. The 8-9 matchup, McCook Central Montrose, Woonsocket Wessington Springs Sanborn Central. 2 good teams ended up right at that 8-9 spot. The winner gets to play winner. So that's your treat for winning that game. But 2 teams I think that could make some noise if the seedings would have went better for them. The only potential upset I see in 11B is maybe Wagner is a team to watch. Groton has been solid all year long. They've been winning by good margins, but you just look at their strength of schedule, and you look at Wagner's strength of schedule, and this one, I'm thinking maybe Wagner has a shot at it. I'm not picking them, but I think they have a shot in this one. Redfield takes on Roncalli. That's a rematch of an earlier game this year. Roncalli won 36, but you look at some of the common scores lately, and that one could be a lot closer than people think. In 9AA, another interesting 8-9 matchup. We've got Platt, the defending champs, going against Chester. That should be interesting. Garrettson, who's just dropped a couple games lately, they got Hamlin right away in the 7-10. And then one of the more interesting games of the week, Canastota Freeman at Florence Henry. Canastota Freeman, man, 4-4 this year, but their 4 losses have come to pretty good teams. I did the projections. I think they have a shot at making it a few rounds into this 9AA playoff, so a real tough draw for Florence Henry. In 9A, the 8-9 is Castlewood and Kadoka. Kadoka, I think they're hitting Castlewood at the right time. Castlewood's had a couple losses against teams that a couple weeks ago I don't think they would have lost to. They lost to Oldham Ramona Rutland last week. By the way, ORR takes on Wolsey Wessington, who just lost to Parkston last week and need a bounce back. And then Burke and Gregory. I mean, there's only about 10 miles that separate these two communities. Burke's coming off of a big comeback win last week. Gregory got some quality wins down the stretch. So there's a little bit extra juice on this one just because of the geographical rivalry. And in 9B, to me, this one is going to be the craziest playoff because there's really no favorite. I mean, you got so many teams that could make a run here, and the only interesting first-round game that I see is the Sully Buttes Alcester Hudson game because those two teams have played well at times this year and played poorly at times this year, and we'll see which one comes through to the end. Any of those playoff games you're looking forward to checking out, Michael?
Well, no. I mean, I just to comment on 9B, I mean, Hitchcock-Tulare just missed beating the top team in the class in Avon.
Yeah, they went for two and missed it.
Yeah, it's this class is really, really close. Like they were at least in the media poll, they were number 5, whereas Avon's been number 1 pretty much all year. Or
halfway through the year.
Halfway through the year. I mean, they started their climb in the beginning of the year, and then they've pretty much been dominant in that second stretch. But it's this is really, really close, and I mean, it gets you excited. There's a lot of teams that these 8-9 matchups I'm really keeping a close eye on because there could be a lot of contenders within those 8-9s in some of these smaller classes.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think interesting you brought up Hitchcock-Tulare because I look at their schedule, and again, they've got some losses, but they've been competing with good teams. And the weird draw that they get is if they do win and Potter County wins, which we expect, they have to play each other. And I think those are two, potential title-worthy opponents that are going to have to play each other in the next round, in the round of 8. So who knows how that's going to work out. Del St. Mary's has been playing better lately. They played right with DeSmet last week for the first half before they kind of started giving up some big plays. They got a game against, I believe, Gayville Vallon, if I remember right. That's off of memory. And if I'm wrong, I'll edit this out. So no worries.
It's against Corsica.
Oh, yeah, they play Corsica Stickney. And then if they win, I think they have a potential matchup with Gayville Vallon.
Yeah.
I think.
Now, I do want to jump back to 11B because, I know that you had advocated for Mount Vernon Plankinton a couple weeks ago. They actually got a good draw in the bracket.
It was a huge win against Woonsocket last week to get that, and they only won 6-0. But
yeah, but they're one of those teams that can really make a run, and they're on the other side of the bracket of winter.
Right, that was huge.
I mean, that's absolutely enormous. So in terms of teams that have a path to the final, like Mount Vernon Plankinton, just based on nature of just being on the other side of the dominant best team in the class, they have one of the best paths there, and that's a team that I'm really, really keeping a close eye on. Yeah. They got a good draw in their first round matchup. They're going up against Beresford, and And yeah, so I'm keeping a close eye on that team, and I know that you had advocated for them a few weeks ago, and I'm sure you're glad that they're getting a good draw.
They are, and if you're looking at who's played winner the best, like we've said, winner's head and shoulders above everybody, but who's played winner the closest this year? It was Mount Vernon Plankinton early in the season, and that's kind of what knocked MVP down. So maybe a rematch there would be our best actual game in the finals. No disrespect to Sioux Valley, who can really chuck the ball, but they give up some chunk plays as well. So we'll see how that all works out. It'll be interesting. What are you working on this week, Michael? Anything covering on Thursday night we should know about?
Well, Argus is going to be at a few games. I'm going to be at the Brandon Valley Harrisburg game. And then we got the double header at Howard Wood Field that we're going to have presence at, and then also we're going to be going out to Del Rapids St. Mary at Corsica Stickney for 11B playoffs, 9B playoffs,
and
yeah, so a lot of games this weekend. It's playoff time. We're all hands on deck, and I'm really excited.
It's ready to go. And next week, by the way, we have playoff games on Thursday as well. So we'll be back next Wednesday. See you then.